Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Big developments on the story between AlphaTauri and Red Bull for the upcoming season. Zak Brown says the teams have major concerns about the relationship between the two parties, especially now that AlphaTauri are moving their aerodynamic facilities to Milton Keynes alongside Red Bull. They believe, especially in the cost cap era with the limited resources the teams have, sharing of resources between these two teams could well be going on. And if the FIA isn't policing it properly, there could be cheating a fit to in Formula 1 yet again. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, a pretty big update here from Sauber. So if you didn't see this the other day, I apologise in advance, but Stake F1 team Kick Sauber is meant to be next year's team now. Now the FIA came out with their, effectively, the list of teammates for the upcoming season, and the drivers that will be driving for them, this type of stuff. But AlphaTauri was still AlphaTauri. So just because that's the name that's been released doesn't necessarily mean it's the final version of the name that might be coming out at some point. So this is meant to be the name. It's so bad for so many reasons. We talked about it the other day. Today, however, very recently, Alfa Romeo F1 Team Stake, which is what they're currently known as, I'm guessing until like the end of the calendar year or something, and then it's going to be no longer Alfa Romeo, of course, because they're not going to be the title sponsor anymore. It's going to be Stake, we believe. So they come up with this. If you think you already know, i.e., basically saying what the current team name is not going to be the final version, think again, serving up on the 1st of January 24. Now, I don't know whether the reaction to this was so negative that they decided we have to make a change, but that might be what's happened here. It seems our recently released team name has been getting a lot of attention. While we are not yet ready to unveil the final results, we are aware of what's at stake, which is, this can't be unintentional to say stake, and of course you've got Stake as the sponsor, but, we'll see. Rest assured, we are on a mission to unleash the most exciting team identity this team has ever seen. Gone are the days of the short and sweet. We are cooking up a feast. So, look, I don't know what they're going for here. Try and figure it out in the comment section below if you actually care or even want to. I'm sure that Sauber would like to call themselves Sauber, but in the current state of Formula 1, that's not how it works. You've got to have at least one title sponsor, if not 2, 3, however many you can possibly fit in. So that's what they're going to try and do. Gone are the days of short and sweet, they say. So I think we can guess potentially what that might mean. Race fans, rankings as well. We're getting close to the conclusion now. We know what number 1's going to be. We saw Sainz yesterday was 9th place in this. Russell gets 8th place, which I think is about right, to be honest. And then Piastri gets 7th place. So, of course, that leaves your top 6 drivers as Max Verstappen is going to be number 1. Second place could be either, I think, Alonso or Hamilton, depending which way you go. I'd put the other one of those in 3rd. Then you're going to go Norris or Leclerc. And then I guess they've got Alex Albon, right, in like 6th or something like that. I guess that would kind of round out the way things are going, which, might be justified. So we'll see what happens over the coming days, but I think this is about right. It's always difficult for a guy like Albon, wherever he potentially gets placed, because he's been smoking Sargent all year. He's done very well in the Williams, but you never really know how good he's been when he's not competing against Piastri. We've seen him against Norris, which is obviously very impressive, especially given that for a large part of the season, he did not have the same upgrades that Norris had, Austria being one such example, and even a couple of races later, it was a similar story. McLaren, though, are developing for the new season, as are all the other cars. Ferrari say that their track test of the SF23 helps them with this upcoming year's development. Mercedes are saying that, well, it's looking good, we're making good progress, Hamilton's got faith in the team, all this type of stuff. And even Alpine have said their car is going to be completely new from front to back after the development potential plateaued, so they've decided they're going to go a different route. So there's going to be multiple brand new cars basically on the grid next season. Will any of them be good enough is a question, but the concern is that some of these teams have, and for understandable reasons, especially if you're a midfield team, is the resurgence of AlphaTauri. At the end of the most recent season, AlphaTauri went from being the worst car at the start of the year to arguably the 4th or 5th best car at the end of last season. They were very competitive, scored a fair few points. I mean, let's not forget Tsunoda at the end of the season in Abu Dhabi, very impressive Grand Prix, but also Ricciardo back in Mexico is another such example. They brought some upgrades in Singapore, and next year AlphaTauri are going to go one step further. Most of the components on these cars you can buy if you want to, transferable components. The crucial aerodynamic stuff you've got to do yourself, but most of the car you can buy from Red Bull if you wanted to, and that's what they will do. Next season they will use the RB19's front, pull rod front suspension, they'll use the rear suspension, they'll use what they can from the Red Bull setup. And that is smart business, do what's allowed within the rules given the relationship between those two teams. But understandably, many teams are saying, are we sure this should be allowed in the way that it is? And many of these teams raised concerns back in, 18 years ago when Red Bull and Toro Rosso were first becoming a thing, the sharing of chassis and stuff like this that was, then outlawed, you couldn't do it anymore, and things changed over time. But the Toro Rosso Red Bull relationship has set some of the rules and the standards on what can be allowed between two teams sharing an ownership group. Now, especially nowadays in Formula One, it's no longer financially necessary to prop up the grid by one team owning two teams, as it were, one ownership group owning two teams, because, AlphaTauri have interest to the tune of $1.2 billion to sell the team. But Red Bull have said, no, we're not doing that. We're going to use them for our own benefit and rebrand them to whatever they will do going forward. So it's no longer a financial thing. It's merely Red Bull feel in their best interest to maintain the two teams for testing of certain things, when they put the Honda engines in, stuff like this, to see if they were going to be any good. Drivers as well, it's a benefit, and also it kind of helps when you've got two teams if you need a driver to get out of the way in a certain point in a Grand Prix. Other teams don't necessarily have that luxury. Sure, Mercedes and Williams have a relationship, Haas and Ferrari have a relationship, but it's not quite the same as the same ownership group, as we see in the case of Red Bull. So Zak Brown has come up with some interesting statements on this. We heard some rumours about what he was saying a few days ago, but now we have the full quotes to the matter when Zak Brown says, we have some big concerns over the current relationship between the two parties, on the alliance between the two teams. Now, as you say, this isn't a brand new thing, right? It's not like they've just become a new, partnership here, but this has been a thing for a very long time. But I think the circumstances now are slightly different to how they were a few years ago. Not just because of the cost cap that we'll dive into, but also the relocation of some of AlphaTauri's facilities. So these are Zak Brown's comments on the matter. Speaking to Autosport, McLaren boss said, the million-dollar question that none of us know is how early did Red Bull turn off this year's car? We know we have outperformed the others in the development race, and we've closed the gap to Red Bull, but what none of us know is, did Red Bull stop? Have we just caught up, or were they still developing? Also, and this is all tied in some respects, we have some big concerns over the alliance between AlphaTauri and Red Bull. I think that is something that needs to be addressed in the future. So I still think the sport has a way to go in order to make sure that everybody is truly independent as they should be. Going on to say, two teams with common ownership, you wouldn't have that in other sports. It could benefit Red Bull in a lot of different ways. There's a reason why they're moving a lot of people from Italy, and this is probably the key point that has sparked this debate, that Red Bull have decided that AlphaTauri, a lot of their team, is now going to relocate from Faenza in Italy, where Scuderia AlphaTauri is based, back to Milton Keynes alongside the Red Bull team, which makes things much harder to police than it was previously, and also raises the question, why might you think of doing that, Red Bull, if not to try and find ways to gain competitive advantage for the teams, whether that's within or outside of what the regulations allow? As Helmut Marko has said, they are going to do absolutely everything they can to benefit from having two teams. I get that because that's what the rules say, but I think we need to look at the governance of the sport around these technical alliances. So I'm very concerned about the partnership. This is not something that's just concerning Zak Brown and McLaren, but I think it's the same story for every team in that kind of position. If you're a team that's, third, fourth, fifth, something in that ballpark, you've got to be concerned about AlphaTauri because when they were good, they were pretty good and they were taking points off these teams. I mean, if you're McLaren, you don't want AlphaTauri there taking points off you because they've got a big advantage based on their reliance with Red Bull, but that's basically what they're doing at the moment. So as I say, I think there's two key reasons why this is a big topic of discussion now. It's the cost cap in parts, and I guess we'll talk about that now. It used to be a few years ago, there was no cost cap, it wasn't really a thing. Like nowadays, the testing time is limited on the wind tunnel stuff, on the CFD testing, the simulations, all this stuff. It's limited to a certain number of hours. Red Bull had that cut down even further based on the cost cap breach in 2021 over the last 12 months or so. Therefore, when you've got limited resources, if Red Bull were able to use some of AlphaTauri's resources for their own testing, and this is something that we don't know if they're doing. We'd presume they're not doing it, of course. But do the FIA appropriately police this, right? I think in the current state of affairs, with the cost cap in place, when there's only a certain amount of money you can spend, with the testing time restrictions in place, if you own two teams, you might be able to find a way for them, you know, to have certain conversations, to allow certain things that they are using to be useful for yourself as well. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's an additional concern now, more so than it was, let's say, 5-6 years ago. But in addition to that, you've now got AlphaTauri. So there was a talking point here back in, this is August, early one, kind of mid-August, let's say, that the R&D center for AlphaTauri could be moved to Milton Keynes. And, you know, that's kind of what Haas and Ferrari have going on. Guys, we definitely don't want to do anything illegal, Peter Bayer says, but we also know that certain things are possible because we see that it's happening elsewhere. And then at the end of the month, it was then confirmed that, yeah, they will be doing everything they can, like all of the parts they can take from Red Bull, they will basically take, and they will also move their aerodynamics design team to Milton Keynes. So I think this is the other reason why Zak Brown's saying, look, we have some concerns here. AlphaTauri are moving their aero guys to Milton Keynes. They have substantially more aero development testing time, AlphaTauri do, than Red Bull do. So can the FIA appropriately police how much of that information, you know, how much of the wind tunnel time is going to AlphaTauri and how much is going to Red Bull if nobody's there to watch and they're all in the same facility? You know, it's a question, and you would like to believe that these Formula 1 teams will play fair, but we know, based on the history of Formula 1, that's not necessarily going to be the case at all. So if the FIA don't appropriately get this stuff sorted, it's going to be a challenge. And we even saw just yesterday that the FIA are saying, all right, guys, we're no longer going to give you notice as to when we turn up. So you can discard various documents, or you can behave in a certain way that will make it seem like there's nothing going on. And it's not just like this applies to Red Bull and AlphaTauri, but they are the best example because they are owned by the same people. They're now going to be largely in the same place. Mercedes and even Aston Martin have to answer these questions as well because they share a wind tunnel for now before Aston Martin's new facility comes online. And, you know, they've said, Aston Martin have said, the relationship we have with Mercedes is very robust from that side. They use separate doors to enter the tunnel to ensure absolute confidentiality. So sure, customer teams sharing facilities, but not quite with the same relationship, right? Like AlphaTauri and Red Bull, because they're owned by the same people. You know, if they were to say, all right, AlphaTauri, like, maybe we'll take those extra 10 hours of wind tunnel time this month, or whatever the case might be, it's not the same deal as it is with Aston Martin Mercedes. So very much intrigued to your perspective on the comment section, but I do think Zak Brown's concerns are justified and valid in this case. We know that Zak Brown went very hard on Christian Horner and Red Bull when they were found to have broken the cost cap, right? Said, you know, it was cheating and all this stuff, and Horner was not happy about that term being thrown around. So, you know, Brown has found something else to go at them for over the next 6 months or so, and we'll see if there's any statements from Red Bull and certainly from the FIA on how they intend to ensure that none of these concerns are going to be actualized. But we know that in Formula 1, if teams find a way to find any degree of competitive advantage, they will go for it. Now, Helmut Marko, though, by the way, has been rumoured to be unsure as to whether he might continue with Red Bull after 2024. We know that Oliver Mintzlaff has come in over there at Red Bull, taken over with Dietrich Mateschitz, of course, sadly passing away. And Marko's influence has been reduced and has been cut back. We know that even a couple of months ago, there are rumours that there was some sort of power struggle rift between Marko and Horner, and then Marko referred to him as Mr. Horner in an interview and said that when I decide to step away, it's my decision and not the decision, let's say, of Mr. Horner. But, you know, it seems like his influence on the academy is getting reduced. He might not stay around for too much longer. So that'd be interesting, especially in terms of what that means for the relationship with AlphaTauri. These, though, by the way, are some of the drivers for, well, okay, we've got Perez and Verstappen here for Red Bull, but these are some of the junior drivers around the grid. I think Red Bull also have Pietro Fittipaldi today. So it's Hadjar Martin and I think Fittipaldi for Red Bull, which, you know, solid drivers, but I don't think there's anyone there that's really setting the world on fire. Bortoletto's with McLaren. You've got Martin Didmani with Alpine, Colapinto and O'Sullivan with Williams. To me, though, the best teams for this are Ferrari and Mercedes because, you know, the other teams have good drivers, but Behrman and Antonelli are kind of more potential, you know, prodigy level talents. I think Behrman's very good. Antonelli, we haven't seen him in Formula 2 yet, but of course he's been thrown around as potentially a next real great of the sport. So, you know, I think that, sure, maybe more drivers is better, and Red Bull have certainly done that over the last few years, but there's no equivalent for finding a real diamond in the rough driver that potentially Ferrari and Mercedes have managed with their project, and Red Bull haven't really achieved in some time. But I guess it doesn't matter when you've got Max Verstappen in our team for the next few years. So very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.